I'm Kendall St. John with the Center on Transition Innovations at Virginia Commonwealth University. I'm excited to talk with you today about uncovering the strengths your children possess and how to use those for career planning and transition planning. So before we get started, what's the objective? Why is it important to learn about strengths and build from a strength-based approach? For one thing, it's all about building a life. I don't think any of us decided that we were going to build our life and build our careers based on things we didn't do well or things that we didn't enjoy. I know from my perspective, my life would look very different if I had started building a career and building a life based on my math skills, let's say. That probably wouldn't have looked pretty. I don't think I would be very happy right now, and I might not even be employed. So that's one of the reasons is we want to build a life that builds towards success, and a strength-based approach is the way to do that. So let's talk just a little bit about the career planning process and how strengths fit into that. As you'll see from the screen, step one is discovering strengths. And they can be any kind of strength, but we know that that's going to be the first step on our career planning process. It's a circular process that goes on to assessments and building goals and taking action. But after each one of those steps, we're going to be gathering some information and some strengths on the student as well. Each time they take any sort of experience and apply their strengths to it, that gives us more information about how well that can be applied to the career planning process and their transition from school to adult options. So what exactly is a strength-based approach? Well, it's looking at what does a student do well? What do they like? What are they interested in? And what contributions are they making in the home, school, and community? How do they help others? Because oftentimes that tells us what they enjoy and what they're good at. Sometimes people are a little bit apprehensive. They're like, is this all unicorns and rainbows? We don't want to just have an approach that doesn't take into account a student's challenges and conditions for success. The strength-based approach certainly doesn't ignore those challenges. What it does is it builds on their strengths while honoring their challenges and conditions for success. We know that the conditions for success and their challenges are all part of the package, and we want to make sure that we're supporting students as they build careers and activities that are based on their strengths. You might be wondering, how does a strength-based approach relate to self-determination? And they're actually very closely aligned. For one thing, it's person-centered. My goodness, we can't talk about a student and discover their strength without the focus being on who they are and holistically, what are all the things that they like? What are all the things that they're good at? And really getting varied voices, not just one voice that sits down and writes down a list of the student's strengths, but looking at where are those strengths demonstrated in the home? How are they demonstrated in the school across settings? Because you might have students who really demonstrate one strength in PE or art, but a different one when they're in their academic classes. So we want varied voices from across the spectrum of the student's life in their home, school, and community. Most importantly, we want the student's voice. A strength-based approach is not somehow separate from including the student voice. They certainly have a wonderful understanding of who they are and what their strengths are, what their conditions for success and their challenges, and how we can start building on those. I'm always surprised when I have a student sitting in a meeting, the things that they come up with that people around the table haven't thought about before because no one's asked them. So in a very, very true way, the strength-based approach and self-determination go hand in hand. Let's start with, what do you know already? We're going to uncover those strengths, and we don't have to do anything special. From the very beginning, you're just going to say, what do I already know? Because everybody has a before. It doesn't matter how old your child is. They've had experiences in the past, and let's say scouts or gymnastics, and maybe they're not doing them anymore, but they demonstrated strengths while they were involved in those activities. Look at what they did before and in their experiences in the home, school, and community in the past, and start to collect some of those strengths that you've seen in your child across the years. The same thing for the other voices that we'd like to hear from. If there are grandparents or other people in your family or extended family with friends that have an understanding of your child, certainly include them in developing these and uncovering these strengths. Routines are also a really nice way to start uncovering strengths. You may not think about it, but let's just use a morning routine as an example. Think about and maybe sit around in a small group of your family, the child, and think about, what does the morning routine look like? Do they get themselves up? Do they fix breakfast? Do they get themselves on the bus? How about other morning routines and self-care that they might be doing? Those are all strengths. Anything that they're doing independently or even semi-independently during the morning routine is an indication of their strengths and interests. Start collecting those and I would say celebrating them, because you're going to start building on those as well. That gives you an indication of, what does my child do well? What are they already independent on? But also, what do we need to build on? There are also several assessments that are identified as strength-based assessments. But you don't necessarily have to use one that's called a strength-based assessment. There are lots of ways that you can utilize assessments, both informal and formal, to gather and garner some strengths and discover them, uncover them. One would be family surveys. Mentioned before extended family, but a lot of times they do have a different aspect of, or they've had different experiences with your child than you have, and can tell you a little bit more about what they've noticed about strengths. Interviews or checklists also work really well. There are certainly formal assessments that will give you a whole rundown of the strengths that your child demonstrates on formal assessments during the triennial evaluation or SOLs or other formal assessments. Look back at those and see, what can we uncover? School-based records. What classes have they done well in? What environments do they do best in? Do they do better in a structured environment? Do they do really well in one that allows them to demonstrate their creativity? Look at those different environments across the school and across the community to discover what are some of the strengths that we need to note. If they have any sort of classroom job or school job, those are great observations as well. I would almost recommend that the person who does that observation be somebody who might not be as familiar with your child, because oftentimes they can pick up on things that somebody who is with them every day may not notice. And then there are lots of informal assessments. And we'll talk about a few more of those in just a moment. So what are some tools that I can tell you about right now today that might be of interest to you? There are certainly online assessments, and I've mentioned those before. There are some with Virginia Career View. There are others, if you even Google strength-based assessments, that you can go in. You could do them yourselves. I think it's really beneficial for everybody to know what their strengths are. So that's one way, are those online assessments. There are also two tools that are on the Center on Transition Innovations website. One is authentic assessment that shows you and educators, how can we use authentic environments, which are the environments that the student is already interacting in, to use an assessment. It's an assessment that looks at the student as they're doing something. And then the other one is Discovering Me, which is a person-centered planning tool that utilizes 3 meetings. And the first one is entirely looking at what are the students' strengths, their interests, their challenges, and their conditions for success. It's an interview process, and then we put it into actually something that's fairly similar to some other tools that people use. It's foundation information that has blocks of information with a list of the students' strengths and contributions and their interests, and then their conditions for success and challenges. And we build opportunities based on the students' interests and strengths and contributions while still honoring those conditions for success and challenges. We don't ever want to ignore those challenges, because we know that a pathway to success is building on strengths, but honoring the challenges and conditions for success. As I said, those are Authentic Assessment and Discovering Me are both tools that you can find on the Center on Transition Innovations website. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about uncovering your child's strengths. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thanks so much.